On the government, we have Underwood Union 2, and on the opposition, we have KU1. Alright, I would like to invite the Prime Minister to start the debate.
Thank you, and welcome to the debate, adjudicators, debaters, and observers. Now, we would like to debate on the motion that this House would require political neutrality from religious leaders. And first, I would like to define key terms in this debate. First, I would like to define political neutrality, which means that political leaders should not take any positions on politics pertaining to economic, social, and political issues should not be intervened by religious leaders. And to define religious leaders, we mean religious leaders voted by a council of religious council. And now there's a clear reason why we define the terms this way, because our model is this. We set the context of this debate in theocracies, which means that there's a democratically elected government, elected officials, but there are also religious officials who are elected by a religious council that also governs with politically elected, democratically elected officials. Now, this is important because often in these theocracies, religious leaders often have a significant or even an upper hand in political decision making. For example, Iran, the Guardian Council elects Ayatollah, which is a religious leader that has a very significant say in politics, but also have a president and the elected legislature by the people. Now, we would like to make sure clearly what the problem is. Now, right now, religious leaders control the politics to the extent that political sectors and people's say is significantly reduced. And because this happens, we believe there are many problems, which flows right into our substantive case. Now, I would like to signpost. First argument pertains to the issue that what harms it brings to the democratic elements, because people have virtually no say in the government. Second argument involves that disproportionate powers given to the religious leaders are bad, and we'll further elaborate on that. And our Deputy Prime Minister would like to stress upon argument 3, which is that it affects negatively decision making in the international community. And fourth and last, he would lastly explain about how perception of religions to other nations is negative. Now, I would like to go on to our substantive case. First, there are harms. The harms are brought to democratic elements of these nations because people have no say. For example, Iran, there's a voted and elected legislature and the executive branch by the people. And the functions of these branches are to get people's is to reflect people's opinion in the politics and the political decisions that they make. However, and this is why these branches are accountable and credited and trusted by the people. But when this sectors of government is controlled by the people, either directly or indirectly, it lessens the accountability that people have toward the government. For example, Ayatollah, the religious leader that I mentioned, intervened in the Iran president's re-election. And by this example, people's voice were cancelled, and when religious leaders decided to step in to intervene in an executive branch that was voted and elected by the people. And there were, yes?
If these religious leaders were elected, how does their expression of opinion harm this kind of functioning?
Ma'am, that is an excellent point. We said that this religious leader, Ayatollah, wasn't voted by the people. It was voted by a religious council named Guardian Council. And this is why the religious leaders aren't as accountable to the people as the executive or legislative branch that have been directly voted by the people and are accountable. Now, I would like to go on to example why this is detrimental to democratic elements of the government. Now, for example, the Iran president was trying to build a nuclear technology and had a stance against the United States. it's another debate if this stance of president is right or not. But however, he, as a leader of the executive branch, is a reflection of people's opinions. However, Ayatollah intervened in this event and said that they would like to make compromises with the U.S. This is virtually canceling out people's opinion, because people's opinions is the executive council, because they've been voted by the people.
Yeah.
And this is bad. And this is not the only reason it's bad. It also promotes further not only apathy of people, that they have no say in the government and they have no power to do what's right, but it also creates antipathy in people. Now, I would like to build on our second substantive argument, which is that this proportionate powers given to the religious leaders is bad for several reasons, and we would like to give you several analysis. First, when theocracy is when political sector and religious sector must have a balance, and this is an ideal theocracy. However, in this case, please have a seat. One individual, for say Ayatollah, has too much power, and this breaks the balance of the ideal balance that should be achieved in a theocracy. Now, and second, religious leaders often take certain stances that is often detrimental to human rights. For example, in the Islam nations, the religious leaders take very, very conservative stances pertaining to women's rights, because it is mentioned in their religious text that women's rights is women's rights should be limited to a very much extent. And this is detrimental not only human rights, but this is also canceling out people's opinion, because we see a gradual trend in Islam nations to increase women's rights, and this is going against the trend of the people, which also supports our argument that religious leaders having too much say in politics is going against people's say and is being detrimental to democratic elements. And our last analysis is that there's no way to check and balance. There's no way to check and balance. In other governments, there are means of check and balance, which means that legislative, executive, and often judicial branches check and balance each other, so that one sector of government do not get too big to infringe upon the people's rights. However, because this religious sector, Ayatollah, religious leader, is not part of the government, there's no one to check and balance. And especially when religious leaders have so much say in the politics, there's no adversary that they have to check that they are using their powers correctly and that there is no room for abuse. Now, because we have built on these arguments, and because our stance and model stands clear, we beg to propose. Thank you.
The speaker spoke for 7 minutes and 20 seconds.
I thank the Prime Minister for her speech. I'd like to invite the Leader of the Opposition.
Ladies and gentlemen, to what the Prime Minister just said, we have one answer. Influence is not a sin. Having significance in politics is never a sin, ladies and gentlemen. We say strongly on the opposition side that politics has no right or wrong, ladies and gentlemen. Views have no right or wrong. An expression of these political views, therefore, have no right or wrong. We say that opinions that these religious leaders make, these political opinions they express to the public, cannot always be agreed upon with everyone. However, just simply for this reason, we don't think that it's legitimate for the government to say that we are going to ban all political leaders from expressing their opinion in public. Before I go on, a few points of rebuttal. Firstly, the government seems to have a misconcept upon the term theocracy. Now, theocracy means that religious leaders are political leaders, ladies and gentlemen. How in the term of theocracy, how in a system of theocracy do you expect to separate the government from political leaders? Secondly, on that point, please sit down. They say that we have to prevent this kind of religious influence of religious leaders into politics. Now, if the current government is so weak, let's say there are different governments, if the current government is so weak to the point that the presidential election is even influenced by their religious leaders, how does the government impose this policy and ban all political expression of religious leaders, ladies and gentlemen? And on that point, yes.
We clearly told you that this occurs specifically because of the problem that you're talking about. If you continue to give religious leaders this ability to influence politics and make no separation, they basically govern the nation to an extent where political institutions are no effect.
Then Watson, you can tell me how these politicians or politicians that are not religious leaders are going to force these religious leaders not to make political comments or influence the government structure when the government right now is so weak. Tell me in your speech. So, we say that the current problem is occurring because there's a weak operation of the government. The politicians themselves are weak, and the democratic system itself is weak. We don't think that's because religious leaders have their own opinions. Ladies and gentlemen, please sit down. We say that the purpose of politics itself is to diversify the different types of views that exist in society, ladies and gentlemen. We say that diversity in this sense is extremely important. And just by saying you have influence upon that society, banning that diversity and your right to express that diversity is extremely detrimental. I'm going to talk about 2 points in my substantial speech. Firstly, I'm going to talk about the goal of religion. What's the fundamental purpose that religion was established on? Secondly, I'm going to talk about situations where politics is extremely correlated with religion and how it would be extremely difficult to separate that. My second speaker is going to talk about more on the individual level, how it is the role of these leaders and the rights of these leaders to express their free opinion. Firstly, about the goal of religion, ladies and gentlemen. We say that when you believe in a religion, there are 2 different types of scenarios. One, you have to actively spread your religious beliefs to different people. Or 2, you just focus on your self-discipline and meditate in your own home. Now, we say that in both cases, it's extremely dangerous for the government to regulate this. Because in the first scenario, ladies and gentlemen, by stopping all types of active spread out of your religious views, you're denying that religion itself. Let's take the example of Christianity, ladies and gentlemen. This means sit down. Let's take the example of Christianity. Now, we see, especially in Korea, Christians wanting to convince you to believe in God. Now, when you stop that for religious leaders to convey their beliefs, express their beliefs, that is a fundamental denial on the government side, saying that you cannot express your beliefs and your core value within that religion is wrong. Please sit down. Secondly, when you stop people, when this religion focuses on self-discipline, like Buddhism, for example, in those cases, how does that religion thrive when you prohibit an active exchange of these different views within that religion, ladies and gentlemen? We think that the government policy, by stopping all types of religious leaders from expressing their political opinions, is extremely dangerous in this sense because it goes directly against the goal of religion itself. Yes?
How is expressing religious views related to expressing political views that actually have an effect on politics?
Secondly, we say, and that goes into my second substantial point, we say that religion is inseparable from politics. We say that religion, they say that religious beliefs or expression of religious political views is all about economic, social, and political issues. Then what issues do these religious leaders have to comment on? Please sit down. What do they say? Do they say, oh, God is almighty? Or do they just say, well, let's have peace? No, ladies and gentlemen, it's the responsibility of these religious leaders to engage in society, not seclude themselves from society and make them this holy type of group that nobody can engage in, ladies and gentlemen. This is absurd. We say that in cases where religion is directly related to politics. Let me give you a few examples. Abortion, ladies and gentlemen. Abortion, homosexuality, ladies and gentlemen. These are all issues where religious leaders or religious groups actively express their opinion on, ladies and gentlemen.
Ma'am.
You're out of order. Now, a more severe case is when the fundamental structure of that religious group is extremely closely correlated with the structure of its existence. For example, the Dalai Lama. In the China-Tibet issue, the Dalai Lama is not only a political leader, ladies and gentlemen, he's also the religious leader of that group. We say that it is, once the government implements this policy, there's always the danger of abuse, ladies and gentlemen. What would China do once we pass this, once we say that they can restrict their political views or religious expression of opinion, ladies and gentlemen? We say having social significance and influence is no sin. We say that politics, expression of political views in today's society has no right or wrong. We beg to oppose.
The speaker spoke for 7 minutes and 29 seconds.
Alright, thank the Leader of the Opposition for her speech. I'd like to now invite the Deputy Prime Minister to the podium.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thailand's view of the role of religious leaders and their authority in theocracies is so naive to the extent that she thinks that this debate is a matter of free expression. They should have the right to express their opinions. No consideration of the direct political influence and control that these religious leaders have over the political institutions, how they influence the outcome of the election, how they influence the outcome of political discussion. This debate, ladies and gentlemen, isn't about free expression, ladies and gentlemen. It's about whether we can tolerate this idea of the balance between the political institutions and the religious the religious offices, whether we can tolerate that balance shifting towards one side. I have 3 points of rebuttal. Firstly, I'm going to talk about our model and the problem with the status quo. Secondly, I'm going to talk about the role of religion. And thirdly, I'm going to talk about politics. Firstly, we told you in a theocracy that there is a clear hierarchy between religious elements and democratic elements. You have a democratically elected president and a legislature in Iran, ladies and gentlemen, that clearly is placed beneath the Guardian Council and furthermore the Ayatollah Khomeini, who is the supreme ultimate religious leader in Iran. We think there is a clear hierarchy here. But this hierarchy means that those who are above can clearly influence, and it's not influence saying that they express their opinions. It's actually tangible, direct control of the governing system, ladies and gentlemen. So we think it's very, very naive and shallow to say, oh, they should have the right to express their opinions, ladies and gentlemen. Because what Miran showed you in her speech is that these religious leaders are actually, in effect, controlling the institutions. To the extent that when Mahmoud Ahmadinejad's re-election was disputed and people were thinking that they were rigged, the Ayatollah just stepped in, shut everyone up, and basically ended the election towards Ahmadinejad's favor. That's to the extent and degree that religious institutions have over democratic institutions. That we think that this disproportionality of power is not justified. We're not saying that the political decisions and the opinions are bad or wrong, ladies and gentlemen. We're saying that that disproportionate influence is not justified and warranted in a theocracy. But secondly, with regards to religion, Because like we like totally adhere to this idea and uphold the idea that yes, religious leaders can like express their opinions. Like regarding abortion, like they can say, yes, we think like having abortion is a bad idea. But the thing is, they cannot make the policies themselves, ladies and gentlemen, and they cannot control the institutions that make those policies. So we think the goal of religion is specifically confined to the religious sphere, ladies and gentlemen. And I'm going to further having a look at this in my speech. Like the fundamental example that we want to talk about is why should Ayatollah Khomeini have the authority to influence like Iran's nuclear policies, which has like nothing to do with religion, ladies and gentlemen, on the basis that he's a religious leader. But thirdly and finally, regarding like politics related to like religion, like they had a very, very vague idea of like politics is like it's always related to like social problems. Firstly, we think that institution-wise, this idea of like political institutions and religious offices are clearly defined and divided in theocracies. So we think there is a clear like division of the kind of things and kind of authorities that such institutions can have in theocracies, and therefore we think in that realm they have the authority to exercise only the amount of things that I have. And in my positive material, I'm going to have a look at the role of religious leaders. So on to my positive material. We're going to talk about our third argument of how this like negatively affects the decision-making processes in the international community. What Miran showed you in her speech is that religious leaders influence domestic politics to a very severe extent. Now we think that these domestic issues have like direct relevance to global issues and the types of discussion that occur in the international community, especially with regards to the nuclear development program of Iran. I think that's a clear example. We think firstly, ladies and gentlemen, that discussions and negotiations in the international community is made by representatives who have the political authority to make a decision. Like, although there are like some political talks within, before like they come to the negotiation, that they have the authority to make that decision. And it's on that basis that agreements and decisions are made. But secondly, we think in theocracies, this idea of representatives having full authority is not there. Why? Because even if they make a decision, ladies and gentlemen, they do not have supreme authority to implement that decision. Why? Because if they come back to their country, there's that religious leader who's going to like block that guy. So we think that's like a problem, because they're like checked and controlled by religious leaders. We think therefore, like agreements that you like reach in the international community have practically no effect, because the agreements and the terms don't get implemented in the same way they have been devised, ladies and gentlemen, because the religious leader, through his supreme authority, like with the specific disproportionate balance of power, can like control everything. But secondly, even if we come to an agreement, it's like very easy to change because of that disproportionate power. Yes, ma'am.
Then how does your model change the current situation?
Because like we don't allow religious leaders to step in those political debates. Like if Mahmoud Ahmadinejad strikes out a nuclear like development agreement, we're not going to let Ayatollah Khomeini like influence that, because we don't think he should have the right to influence that. But thirdly and finally, with regards to this issue, we think religious leaders, like they make such influence and such control in the domestic sphere, but they are never present in the international community, ladies and gentlemen. They have like no accountability to the international community. If they screw things up, if they violate treaties, if they violate negotiations, they're not the ones who are held accountable. So they have every incentive. They don't like, nothing checks them, ladies and gentlemen, for going against that treaties. And we think when it comes to the implementation of important international agreements, like that of nuclear development, we think that's fundamentally harmful. On to the fourth argument of like how the religion is perceived by people, ladies and gentlemen. We think like there is a specific role to religious leaders that we can like talk about in this debate. And that is the fact that they reinforce the religion like as a state religion. So we think like making opinions, like showing the views of that religion is like clearly warranted. That's like not much of a problem. Like this idea of free expression, if they come up with it, I'm going to be like flabbergasted right now. But secondly, we think like these roles mean like clearing up the religious views, like overlooking the system on how like the state religion like evolves to changes. We think like that's their role, like talking about their religion and not like secular political like aspects, ladies and gentlemen. So we think that idea cannot suddenly justify to them suddenly taking control of the whole governance system. So firstly, how is this going to be viewed, ladies and gentlemen, by like people outside, people who don't view that religion, ladies and gentlemen, because religious leaders have like actively intervened. In many cases, they've gone against so much human rights, like what Mira talked about, that was like never responded by time, to the extent that they attract like a lot of antipathy from the international community, ladies and gentlemen. This is like the foundation of like a lot of Western bias against Islam. Like a lot of Western people who don't really have any proximity to Islam think that Islam is like a very intrusive religion going against human rights. We think that is like the foundation of the bias, ladies and gentlemen. But secondly, we think that once these biases kind of manifest, it not only affects that religion as a religion, but it also affects the type of people believing in that religion. So if you have a Westerner who thinks that because the Ayatollah implements all these policies and controls political institutions which have systematic oppression to the people, they think that that's because their religion and the people who believe in that religion, they think that's the belief. We think that in order to solve all this, you have to make it very clear that the political aspects of a country's policies are different and should not be controlled by the religious sector. Therefore, we propose. Thank you.
The speaker spoke for 7 minutes and 31 seconds.
All right, thank the Deputy Prime Minister for his speech. I'd like to now invite the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
So, ladies and gentlemen, in today's society, in today's debate, what we have to think about is that politics, there is no right and wrong. In politics, there are only disagreements, and we believe that this disagreement is what makes politics perfect. What makes politics find a mediation, and what it makes it work is these kinds of conflicts, these kinds of different representations that other individuals are also represented by their leaders and came into this political system so that they can reach a consensus, so that they can reach a mediation. We say that that is the beauty of politics, and that should be valued in today's debate. So, the government side has came up here and then said, okay, the Prime Minister has talked about some women's rights in Iran. The Deputy Prime Minister came up here and then talked about the nuclear weapon issue. So we say that if this was wrong, who are they to decide that is wrong? And who are they to decide what is right?
More information.
The value judgment is not at the hands of the government. However, the value judgment is on the hands of the people. Are on the hands of the citizens, and that is what makes the law, and that is what makes the politics, ladies and gentlemen. And
Can I have that one?
yes.
The clarification is that we're not making a judgment what is right or wrong, but we're saying that the religion leaders have too much power against the democratic institution.
Okay. If the religious leaders are having too much of a power, then we say that that is not within the problem of the system. However, that is within the problem of the current situation within the politics. We say that changing the system is not going to better the problem. However, we say it is going to worsen the problem by actually removing certain kinds of representation that can be actually made by different kinds of religious beliefs. And they have mentioned that because there is a conflict between the president and the religious leader, this is bad. But we say this is exactly the good value, the beauty of politics in today's society. We say that this conflict is what brings good, what brings benefits, and what brings improvements in order to bring stability, in order to represent the majority, in order to represent the citizens in today's society. Yes.
We're not saying that there is a mere conflict between presidents and religious leaders. We've shown you that religious leaders actually control the president to the extent that they determine elections.
Okay, so let me now go on to the nuclear issues, whether they have been talking about regarding that issue. They have been talking about the nuclear issues where the religious leaders had a great influence on this decision making, which has led to a bad situation in the international society. But let me ask you, ladies and gentlemen, where is this bad situation happening again? It's happening in North Korea. Did they have a religious ruling? Did they have a religious leader? We say that nuclear issues are not a matter of religion. Nuclear issues is just a matter of the current policy, and we say that that is something to be blamed upon about the current policy, not about the religious leader and the system that these theocracies have. So, moving on to our arguments, we say that individuals' freedom of speech and freedom of belief is very important in any kind of a society. No, thank you. And further on, I would like to talk about how the role fulfillment of these opinion leaders and these religious leaders are very important and very valuable in today's society. So firstly, moving on to my arguments, I would like to say that all individuals deserve the freedom and the right to
For information.
We say that because these religious leaders are elected by the believers. They have representation. And the government side came up here and then said themselves that these are the representatives of the believers, representatives of the religion. And we believe that there is value on that. And the government is not in the position to judge whether or not it is right or wrong. We say that this is a right representation. If you don't like it, then just ignore it. But we are going to value these kinds of rights that these governments have, and we are going to value these rights that the individuals have because they have a certain freedom to speak to certain kinds of people, and even for the believers, they have a certain rights and the freedom to believe any kind of believe in the religion that they would like to believe in. And we can say that these kinds of religions are always intertwined with politics, as our leader of opposition has already mentioned to you. And we say that this is a necessary situation, especially in order for a society to improve. Because these believers, because these religious beliefs are having certain kind of a political interest, we're making these believers actually actively participating in the politics, whichever their beliefs are, but they are trying to represent themselves by using these religious leaders, and we believe that this is a very valuable system that we must protect in today's society. And we also say that even for the religious leaders, they have their right to represent themselves, and they have the right to represent the group's interests, which will lead on to my second argument about the role fulfillment of these opinion leaders. We can see that the religious leaders are the opinion leaders of these believers because these believers have been electing these leaders to represent themselves. So we can see that these leaders are providing the guideline, providing the code for the believers to actually follow. However, we have to remember that codes are not exactly rules. So as they have mentioned, as we have mentioned, these elected leaders, these religious leaders are elected to represent these believers. We say that because these believers and the interests of these believers as well as religious leaders are going to be represented by this person, these believers will actually have a more say in the politics, and they will also be able to participate better. And we say that the opinion leaders also have the rights to go for the interests and the beliefs of the group that they are representing. In today's society, religious leaders are always going for the interests of the group, and the government does not have the right to judge what is right or what is wrong. We have given you the example of Dalai Lama, which showed you the situation where the religious beliefs and the political beliefs were intertwined together in a very great value. And then we have seen that the Tibetans' rights, Tibetan situations, were very much improved and going towards a step after the Dalai Lama had made political issues and has politically represented these believers. So because we believe that the believers' political participation will be more mainly active, and because we believe that there are rights of these believers and the opinion leaders, the religious leaders, to represent themselves, we are very proud to oppose this motion. Thank you.
The speaker spoke for 7 minutes and 7 seconds.
Alright, I thank the Deputy Leader of the Opposition. Now I'd like to invite the government with the floor.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and honorable judges and other audiences. We have the status quo that the government has made a decision which government is elected by the people. And the decision is roughly interfered by the religious leader who are not elected by the people, are not representing the people. That is a simple status quo we're talking right now and repeatedly talking to you. And we have to make a clarification at the very beginning that there is a line, there is a difference between the political leaders and the religious leaders. As Milan told you in our model, that there is a clear difference between political leaders and religious leaders, that one is elected by the people and representing the people, let the people's voice heard. And the other one is roughly elected by the institutions and not representing the people. And we're talking about the religious leaders that have an institution or traditional religious faith that fundamentally against women and force the government not to have any policy to give women's rights. We're talking about the religious leader like that, and that is why we think we're proposing today. Today I have two major clashes, which is the first one, the health of institution versus the influence or the freedom of expression. And the second one is the relationship between the religion versus the whole society as a picture. And in my first clash, here is another line that there is a clear line between the freedom of speech and a direct negative effect on government's decision. We do recognize that every single person has their freedom of speech. I have freedom to say something more than dear God. But we don't see that a group of people who are not elected by the people have the right to violate the government's right or government's decision. We don't think that is right, and we don't think those are kind of freedom rights that you deserve. Yes.
If these religious leaders are therefore elected by these institutions, we say that there are certain kind of a representation to value these people's representation.
I still don't get it. We repeatedly tell you that in our model there is a clear line which is made clear in the very beginning. And your example provided by like a Dalai Lama, as you said, I vividly heard that he is politically elected, but the reality is he is not politically elected. I'll tell you the process of electing the Dalai Lama. He just got born in the very right time that the first one got dead, and he got born in a good place where is appointed by the Buddhism. Well, I don't think that is an election. If you think that, that is just sad. No, thank you. And I've told you that there is a clear difference between the freedom of expression and the direct negative effect. And we see that the religious leader right now doing is just a negative effect of the government. It's just a violation of the democracy. And I don't see that is right. And the second clash is the relationship between the religion and the whole society. No, thank you. Oh, yes?
Where does your assumption that all expression of religious leaders create negative effects come from?
The point is, the religious leaders are not elected by the people. And we already have a... No, thank you. I'm answering your question. We have a group of people that this government that is elected by the people for sure. They gave a decision and they gave a policy, and it is a religious leader that violently pound on those decisions and violate this decision. That is what's going on right now. We have already a group of people elected by people, represented by the people, and you are just a group of people uncertain. If you don't even have the right example of the religious leader that is really elected politically and really representing the people. But we are saying those religious leaders are just posting a policy, let the government not to give right to the women. And they are just appointed by their right birth and by their right, I don't know, fate or anything. I don't see that is really right. Okay, come back to my second clash, which is the relationship of the religion versus the whole society. As just what I said before, that it is the religious leader not right that they are pounding on the government's decision. And they're saying that religion is relevant to the other stuff. So their decision and their freedom of expression is justified. But we don't see that is really right, because we see that philosophically everything is relevant to each other, and we don't see that everything has a right to violate the other one. And we don't see the relation is kind of really justifying it. And we see that the nature of religion, just like what I said before, is that they are not elected by the people. And in the democracy, we should have the decision made by a group of people or an organization that is elected by the people. And no, thank you. They come up with a ridiculous idea saying that as long as we have a weak government and we have a strong influence of the religion, why don't we just let them go? But and that is the beauty of the politics. But that is the status quo, that the democracy is fundamentally ruined by this influence. But that is why we're proposing today to come up with a really healthy institution that is really representing people's rights. And you're just saying the status quo is bad. Although the status quo is problematic, the existence of the bad status quo just justifies its existence. And I don't think that is really right. And that is why we're proposing today, because it is not a healthy institution that have just a random group of people to pound on other people's rights. And that is why we're proposing today. So, all in all, I've made a clear clarification. I don't want that the opposition side just come up again and say about it, that there is a difference between the politic leaders and religious leaders. Very simple. One is elected by the people, one is not. And one is representing the people, one is not. And we've been saying that the health of institution and the influence of the religion and freedom of expressions doesn't really it's not really like what it said. That because the influence of the religion is negative to the whole society and democracy. And we should build up a healthy institution right now. And their freedom, their rights are not justified. That is why we're proud to propose today. Thank you very much.
The speakers spoke for 7 minutes and 36 seconds.
Okay, I'd like to remind the debaters it's good to be passionate, but don't yell at each other. Okay?
Oh, sorry.
Why are you saying this before my speech? This is unfair.
You're trying to yell back at them, but please don't. Alright. Thank you, Governor Whip, for your speech. Now I'd like to invite the opposition whip to the podium.
I promise to make an effort not to scream. I can't guarantee anything. I'm sorry about that. The opposition today started with a clear stance, and I'm repeating this one more time. The political views cannot be right or wrong. I will tell you, don't laugh at me, I'm warning you, I'm going to tell you how this links to our case and the clashes further on in my speech. Now, we gave you numerous points, but I've tried to group them up into a few clashes so that you can, for your convenience. First of all, in the fact that their motion is an attack on the fundamentals of religion. Secondly, the intertwined nature of religion and politics and how differentiation was not made clear by the government. And thirdly, the innate characteristics of politics and the role of religious leaders themselves. By going on to them one by one. About the attacks on the fundamentals of religion, my LO actually gave you an analysis about how the characteristics of religion itself. Religion cannot exist if it doesn't spread its views, if it doesn't persuade others. Not yet. If Jesus had never left his hometown, if Buddha had chosen to meditate in a cave instead of under a tree, we would have no religion existing in our current
Point of
society.
clarification.
Now, we said to the government that this is a direct attack on the fundamental aspects of religion, and that they're saying that religious leaders cannot have an influence on society. Now, the message, they're saying that religious leaders are not proper representatives. This message itself, that they're not properly representing the beliefs of their believers just because they're not elected, can be an offense, a severe offense to the believers of these people who hold respect to their leaders. Now, the Pope is not elected, but still, the Pope is treated as a very important figure. People get offended if they hear negative assertions towards the Pope. And we say that this itself offends religious people as a whole. Now, going on to the intertwined nature of religion and politics. What the government has told us today is they've been screaming, there's a difference between these people because one's elected and one is not. Well, I'll make clear to you why they didn't make a clear differentiation for us to debate on. They said it's not a matter of opinion, it's the matter of religious leaders having too much influence. Am I correct? Okay. Well, they say there's a difference, but they don't tell us how we make this differentiation. Let me evaluate this on this point. If by definition we're discussing countries which have a separate democratic government, then they're not actually directly implementing these policies factually, even if they do have an immense influence. Then how do we determine whether a religious leader has too much influence or a healthy amount of influence or not enough influence to actually implement a policy directly? Now, they did not give us a specific mechanism so that they could define this. Therefore, we had to expand the case and consider all scenarios in which religious leaders could have a degree of influence in the political system. Before I go on, yes?
So, show us how you justify the Ayatollah, determining the outcome of the election, clearly going against political institutions because of some of his religious authority. Does that have any relevance to him choosing and electing the president and intervening in that process?
Okay, well, the government didn't tell me how that case is so different from other religious leaders having a influence on the political system, and that they didn't give us a mechanism to define this degree of influence that is harmful and the degree of influence that is actually tolerable. Now, the government gave you the...
May I have that, man?
No, thank you. Wow. Okay. What the opposition gave you today is that religion cannot be separated from politics, and this was a flaw that we pointed out from the very beginning. In that their model was simply set that these religious leaders couldn't have a political stance on economic, social, and political issues defined by the government themselves, not the active implementation of political views. We saw their definition as very vague, and actually they forced us to expand the scope of debate to a level because of this vagueness of definition. Now, going on to the innate characteristics of politics and the role of religious leaders as a whole. Now, what this slide gave to you is a direct assumption that the influence of religious leaders is negative. They didn't give us any proof of this. They did not give us any proof that this could be true in all cases. No, thank you, not yet. No value judgment. How can a political decision or a political influence or a political opinion be evaluated as right or wrong when the characteristics of politics itself is about opinion? It's about not all people can agree to a certain decision. And they gave us no mechanism again to evaluate whether a policy is harmful or not. But before I go on, yes.
Why can't it be the government institutions like the executive branch, legislative branch's opinions making a policy? Why does religious have to come in?
Sure.
I have to start all over again. You see, the influence... Why do they have... Why do they have to come in? Okay then, where is the reason why they shouldn't come in is our question. Where is the mechanism that proves that this will lead to a direct negative influence? Now who were you? The DPM gave us this statement that the influence of religious leaders is actually the source of bias somehow towards Islam by Western communities, and this was a negative influence. Absolutely no link to the status quo and how the role of religious leaders is causing such bias. Now, the government, the opposition consistently told you not. Sit down, please. The opposition consistently told you that there is no criterion of evaluation for these sort of judgments. And the fact that they're assuming that these decisions are going to have a negative influence has no justification to their motion in today's debate. And we also talked about the role fulfillment of religious leaders. How can they defend the belief in which the group whose interests they try to protect as a religious leader, if not by democratic representation? How can they do that if they cannot have a political stance, ladies and gentlemen? It is irrational of the government to say this. How can they protect certain beliefs when these beliefs are directly linked to certain political stances and they cannot defend these political stances? These beliefs, on every level of analysis, they're actually conducting a direct attack on religion itself and the role of religious leaders under very vague mechanisms that they could not prove about the sure harms of religious leaders. So what have I given you today? I've told you that it's a fundamental attack on the very aspects of religion, and this is an attack towards people who respect their religious leaders. Secondly, the intertwined nature of religion and politics, how their model did fail to define what will evaluate the degree of influence which is harmful or healthy. And thirdly, the innate characteristics of politics and how religious leaders cannot fulfill their natural role if this motion goes into consideration. We beg you to oppose.
The speakers spoke for 7 minutes and 32 seconds.
Alright, thanks the opposition whip speaker. Now I always get messed up here. Now I would like to invite the reply speaker from the opposition.
Ladies and gentlemen, change is what the government wants to bring. Change to these governmental systems. Change to any type of influence of religious leaders. Well, we say that this change is wrong. This change is illegitimate. This change does not work. I want to look at this on 3 levels, ladies and gentlemen. Firstly, I want to have an overview on what the government policy and the opposition policies were. I want to look at the role fulfillment that was made within this debate. And thirdly, I'll go on to the level of argumentation on both sides. So firstly, about policy. The opposition was extremely confused. I'm sorry, but I was confused. Why was I confused? I kept asking them, what is theocracy? Doesn't theocracy, in its dictionary terms, mean that religious leaders equal political leaders? They say that it's a different type of thing because there's 2 different types of groups. One is elected, one isn't. Then we ask them, if the government system, not the group of religious leaders, if the government is so weak that they're overridden in terms of political terms by these religious leaders and influenced so much, how do we implement this policy to bring the change that the government wants? No answer to that whatsoever. They say that, then we ask them, what is the term neutral? How do you evaluate whether this person, religious leader, has too much influence upon the government system or little influence? No answer to that either. We ask them, why do you assume that all types of decisions made by these religious leaders will always be negative, ladies and gentlemen? No assessment on that point. What we got
on the government, we have
clarified for us what was the difference, what they wanted in the system. But until the whip speaker, and I don't think the reply speaker is going to do this, they never proved to us how they are going to bring change in this system, ladies and gentlemen. So at the end of the debate, if they recognize a dire problem, but they don't have change, what are they left with? They're just like crying babies asking for sugar. Asking for candy. Ladies and gentlemen, we think that the government, in terms of the level of their level of argumentation and engagement, they say that we're trying to justify the status quo. That's not the case, ladies and gentlemen. We're saying that the status quo is not wrong. We're saying that if there's so much negative influence and these religious leaders are trying to override their government and influence in all types of government decisions, then we said it's a problem with the system, ladies and gentlemen. We said that government officials have to make the government itself stronger in terms of prohibiting that religious influence. Well, how are they going to do that? Not answered. They said, they gave you the only example that they had was the case of Iran, ladies and gentlemen. And we say that this was a very cowardly example, the only example that the government pinpointed that was going to benefit them. In the end, we kept on asking them, why was this such a detrimental harm within the domestic situation? Why was it such a detrimental harm in influencing international policies? Because our deputy leader of opposition clearly mentioned to you that the nuclear issue was because of weak laws, weak international laws, for example, regarding the NPT agreement. We said that it's not because of this religious leaders having too much influence. Ladies and gentlemen, at the end of the day, we say that people all have a freedom to express political views. They seem to think that the freedom of speech and the expression of political views was nothing, was a mere type of wishy-washy standard, was a very light type of standard that only the opposition would say. No, ladies and gentlemen, we think that this is extremely important. We think at the end of this debate, in the end, politics has no right or wrong, and we think we should support this. For these reasons, we think that we should oppose this motion. Thank you.
The speaker spoke for 4 minutes and 27 seconds.
Alright, thanks the opposition reply. Now I'd like to hear from the government reply to conclude today's debate.
Mr. Chair, it almost seems as if side opposition thinks that the religious office of the Ayatollah is like a political party in politics. Like, their main values are like, why shouldn't they have the opportunity to express their views? Like, why is it wrong to conflict in politics? This was not the problem. Like, we showed you clearly from the beginning that in a theocracy, the religion is placed above the democratic institutions. But it doesn't entail a justification that those religious officers can control the democratic institutions. So what we're saying in this debate is, if there is a situation like the ones that we pointed out, where the religious officers are controlling and heavily influencing the democratic institution, shouldn't we do something about that? We think we should. I have 3 points. Firstly, what is the problem? Secondly, what is the authority of each institution? And thirdly, what are the effects? So what is the problem? Like, they nitpicked this debate so much to the extent that they were like at the end questioning the standards and assumptions. So I'm going to go over this. Firstly, we told you that this issue and the problem is not a matter of free expression. We told you that religious leaders have the right to express their religious views. Like, we told you that actually that was the role. What we told you, ladies and gentlemen, however, is that they do not have the right to institutional control. That they do not have the right to justify that basis, to suddenly like use the president as their puppet. We think that fundamentally shifts the balance of power between the political and the religious spheres of theocracies. The examples that we gave you was like how the Ayatollah determined the outcome of the Ahmadinejad's re-election. Like how the Ayatollah controls Iran's nuclear policies despite the will of the people. Like, the issue isn't a matter of standards or assumptions. Like, this is a fact, the problem that we try to address in this debate. So we think like for the whip and the reply to resort to this idea of like what is the standard is like really, really weak. We clearly told you that expressing views, like expressing your opinions, that's alright. But if you use like institutional measures to control them, that's fundamentally not wrong. So with this idea of right or wrong, we told you that the issue isn't a matter of like right or wrong. Like, we're not making a value judgment. Like, they totally misrepresented us on that point. We're showing that they have like disproportionate control. We think that's the problem. Secondly, onto the authority of the institutions. We told you that the institutions are separated, which shows like how the domestic, like the political and the religious spheres are separated in theocracies. Like, Miran gave you a brilliant point of information saying like, if political institutions are the ones that are supposed to make the laws and come up with the policies, why should religious leaders have any authority to do with that? And we didn't hear any response from the opposition whip on this, ladies and gentlemen, because we think there is a clearly defined jurisdiction of the policies that they can engage in. We told you that the role of the leader, in my speech, is that it's confined to religion. They oversee the implementation of the state religion. They see like various aspects of the religion should adapt, but they do not get a say on political issues, ladies and gentlemen, and they do not have the authority to rule out democratically elected institutions and the policies that they come up with solely on the basis of religious authority. Like we clearly showed you how like a lot of Iranians like marched and protested on the streets after the Ayatollah intervened to determine the outcome of Ahmadinejad's re-election. We think that's fundamentally bad. Thirdly, onto the effects. Like I told you in my argument, like very clearly, how like because like all the political like representatives to an international negotiations are checked by the Ayatollah, it doesn't have like much effect. Like we heard like the best response to this. Like what about North Korea? Like North Korea doesn't have a religion, therefore religion is not the problem. We think the issue with North Korea is that they just have a bad leader who disagrees with the things. What is under our issue is even if you have a person who agrees with the political authority to reach a certain agreement, if it is not agreed by the Ayatollah, that it doesn't become an agreement. That was our problem, ladies and gentlemen. But secondly, with regards to this idea of bias, because we told you that there's like a lot of Western prejudice against Islam, saying that it's like very intrusive, it doesn't allow for political change because of the specific problems that we told you. Like what we heard in like opposition whip, it's like, well, where is like the link? Like we clearly told you that there is like that prejudice fostered by, and we think like we've analyzed that the factors that contribute to that is specifically the intrusive policies taken by the Ayatollah. Ladies and gentlemen, let's finally talk about the problem that we addressed in the initial place. Does that get solved on our policy? We think it is, because we think our policy allows for an equal balance of political and religious institutions, and that's what we want. Thank you.
The speaker spoke for 4 minutes and 30 seconds.
And that concludes the debate. I would like to ask the speakers to cross the floor and shake hands.